Welcome to Theorycraft. It's a live podcast where game developers and their players engage in conversation. And happy 2023, everybody. It's good to see y'all.
Yeah, you too.
Yeah, man. How you doing, Kevin?
Real good.
Real good. Wow.
Real good.
You survived.
Fresh outlook.
Fresh outlook. Yeah, new year, new Kev. I love it. You survived the wave of deep freezes rippling across Texas.
Right.
You're all good.
Got down to 15 degrees. Ridiculous.
Wow. But the grid held up. I had a friend in Austin that was complaining, but I didn't know if it ever really got catastrophic or whatever.
No, definitely not this time.
It was good. Okay, cool.
Apparently we learned a lot from the last big one. So
Yeah. Well, Ted Cruz was in the country this time, so everything held together. That's good.
That's right.
And Chris, I was talking to you a bunch over break. We'll go into some of our time spent together, but how you feeling in the new year so far?
Good, yeah. Back in the office this week, working on a big milestone for up until March. And so all the team is energized and focused on that, and so that's exciting. So I'm in the office right now in our conference room doing the pod.
Mm-hmm.
So
that's cool. Yeah, boots on the ground.
Yeah, and it's just it's a SoCal. It's not snow, but it's insane. It's like raining all day, every day. I've never seen it like this down here before. It's interesting. It's crazy. Floods and everything. I don't know.
That's nutty, man.
I was always so appreciative of the rain in Southern California.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, y'all need it, like Cadillac Desert and all that. It's going to be great, but that it's there, but still is strange. We had like an insane cold snap up here, and what felt like a foot of snow, which is not very Vancouver, and then it went away just as quickly, and we were back in the kind of like 50s with rain. Yeah, I didn't go anywhere over the holidays. It seems like all travel was a fucking nightmare. Like a third of my office got COVID in December. It's been a long time since we caught up. But I was planted right here, and I was, as I presume both of you were, playing some video games. Did you guys play anything interesting over the break besides the Dark and Darker? I feel like we'll get to that, but you dabbling at all?
Yeah, for sure. I've recently fallen in love with a game called Cosmoteer.
What's that about?
Exploration and Commander.
It's not Astroneer.
No, it's Cosmoteer. It's an early access game, space game. Basically, you and your friends, you can solo or co-op. There's also a PvP mode. You harvest resources, you build ships, and you go on like this. They call it a career mode, but it's like basically just this quest to kill bigger and bigger stuff.
Yeah.
You fight pirates. You can be a pirate. You can just be a trader and a miner. There's different ways to approach success, but their shipbuilding is really, really compelling. There's an old board game called Galaxy Trucker, and it reminds me of that. Like it's a little bit haphazard in the way you can construct ships, but there's a lot of method to the madness. So it's actually very deep, and so you like sort of collect resources, and your ship has to get bigger and bigger, or your fleet. You can make multiple ships instead, and it's really interesting. And then you come across like all the crazy designs that the game puts forward on the enemy ships, and then the game also like has incorporated a lot of like viewer or fan ship designs into the game, and so you get to see some really crazy stuff. And then there's a pretty hardcore PvP scene as well, like people just building interesting ships and battling it out, with like a certain number of points or money,
Yeah.
And so it's been pretty interesting.
These ships, in the way they're built and also in the way they're getting destroyed, they look like ridiculously modular. They're built on like a grid, tile-based kind of scaffolding, It looks like. So, how do they control? Do they control with like realistic physics depending on where you're deciding to put all the thrusters and guns and stuff?
Yes, which is also really interesting. Like if your ship isn't symmetrical, that will matter in how it flies, right? Like
you can make like the Homer's car of spaceships,
right? And so again, there's this really interesting depth to it. One of the people I play with in my play group is an actual like engineer, right? And he just gets lost in it, right? Like I'm like always chomping at the bit, like I want to go kill stuff now. And he's like, wait, I'm redesigning my ship for the 5th time in this half hour, And there's all these little gains, like that you can get from like where your crew is placed and like what they're working on and what they're assigned to do and how far away your power is from your guns and your shields. And so it gets really compelling from a variety of different, like, again, like player skill sets, which is what we talk about a lot here. Like one of the reasons WoW was so successful is because it pulled in so many different types of gamers, right? And so I really appreciate that in design of games. Like this game isn't for everyone, certainly, but there's multiple ways to be successful. And that's really, really valuable, especially in like co-op or multiplayer settings. And this is one of those board game design things that I learned when I was working with board games for a while, was that, typical problem of like one person is running the table, like the smartest guy there he knows the rules really well and he's telling everyone in the co-op setting what to do and how to play. And he's taking away all the agency and fun from everyone else without realizing it because he's so driven to win, And so games that do really well in that space for me are games that like bring a lot of different skill sets to the front in terms of like what you can do to have fun and be of use to your group, right? So a lot that carries over to digital game design, and that this game has a fair bit of that, which is interesting. So yeah, I've been loving that.
That's dope. Chris, you been checking anything out?
Not really. I mean, I played a lot of Dark and Darker with both of you guys, so that was kind of like the main game I was playing during the break, and then I checked out Grounded a bit after its release and played around with that. But yeah, that's basically it. So
that's pretty much it.
I'm torn on Grounded. I'd love to hear your opinion. Like if I should play it or not. It's because it's got the recipe for a game I would love. Co-op survival,
What's new with the release? Because it's been a long time to cook in early access, and I remember even the last time I played it, it felt fairly complete. And that was like
a year
ago.
Yeah. I mean, I played it like over a year ago. Yeah, exactly. And I got like to the highest tier that I had in the early access at the time. It hasn't changed very much since then. I think they added like a lot more creatures and some biomes and more story stuff. My kind of opinion of the game, I think it's worth playing. I think it's a fun game if you like survival crafting kind of games. I don't think it does anything like. The best thing about the game, in my opinion, is like the setting, kind of like the world. Sort of, it's like it's like Honey, I Shrunk the Kids sort of thing, and so that immersion in the world is kind of cool. I think some of the building aspects of like constructing your house and stuff are kind of frustrating UI UX wise, but I mean, I really haven't found a game that I loved. That does. I mean, Minecraft does it really well, but Valheim, there's a lot of rough edges there too with building, and it's just a challenge to do right. It's fun to play cooperatively in the game. I think I played on like the hardest difficulty, and there was some stuff. Maybe it might have been the hardest difficulty, or maybe it's just in general. But like, there's stuff like you can starve and like die of thirst inside your own house when you're AFK using the bathroom, kind of thing. And I don't know. There's stuff like that. I would have been like, well, if you build your house, like maybe it pauses your thirst and hunger when you're in your house.
Right.
Right? Like, little things like that kind of bug.
Park myself next to the refrigerator. Can I get a pass?
Yeah. But I don't know. I think it's fun to play with friends. I recommend it. I would still play through it. And it has a cool look story threaded throughout. Gosh, what's his name? It's Michael Chu from the Overwatch team from Blizzard.
Right, he went there. Yep.
Yeah, he was a quest designer too on WoW, Kevin.
Yeah.
He did the story, I think, for them. Yeah.
So he's gone back and forth between Blizzard and Obsidian a few times now, or a couple times.
I don't know if it was more of a contract thing or if he actually was working there, because he also has been at some other different studios too. So I don't know, but I did see him in the credits. I was like, oh, interesting.
Right. Yeah.
Because the friend I was playing with it, she really she was really interested in the story. So I mean, usually in game stories, I'm not the most. I don't play games for stories usually, but I can understand. I can appreciate people who do. So. Yeah, there's that too. But yeah,
I think like I'm in the camp of a little bit goes a long way for me. Like again, just a little bit of engagement, a little bit of it's like a quest. It directs you in some ways, right? Like helps immerse you just that little bit more. Why am I here? What am I doing this for? Other than I need ore so I can make a new weapon, but why? So a little bit of story there because I have to kill the big bad. because he's ruining the world, I think goes a long way.
One other thing is, I mean, I was flipping through the news to see if there's anything we should, touch on since, we've talked. Seems just like a lot of like union stuff going on, different studios.
Yeah, that's pretty heartening. It does seem like
Yeah.
they're gaining steam. I was just marveling at the the tactical genius of pushing this Zenimax union through while Microsoft is in the middle of the FTC scrutiny with the Blizzard acquisition, and so they kind of have to like play nice and keep the optics as favorable as possible on them. They can't be seen to be like a bunch of angry union busters at the same time that like folks are worried if they're going to start having a monopoly, and so kind of a nice time for those QA folks to band together. It's really cool that it went through. I mean, I feel like I'm for more union representation across the gaming industry. Certainly, like I've never personally advocated for it, but I feel like I would likely benefit from it. And I'm happy to see that stuff coming back up, especially for QA, which seems to me like the discipline that probably needs that representation the most,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, we'll see how it plays out.
Like
Zenimax, it seems like there are lots of loopholes and outsourcing and contracting and ways that they could probably try to go around it. So I hope that the companies will continue to act in good faith as well. But
my pure cynic brain basically says, I think unions would be a great thing for a short time, and then they would become corrupt and become a big problem, right?
Yeah.
Which is, obviously historical as well,
Sure.
Yeah.
It's so difficult to prevent the corruption. One of the biggest
things, right, in America with cars was eventually unions for automobiles sprung up in the country, all with good intentions, but then eventually, American cars fell by the wayside and Japanese and foreign ones started to, take over, so it's unions make sense. Like, I mean, it's easier to construct a union and regulate things internally in a country, but then once you're in a global market, like if the other markets don't do unions, now you're just, the cost of your product is going to increase, and so It's hard to compete on a global scale. So if game studios have unions in America, if China doesn't have them, well, it gives China another advantage. And so it's tricky and complicated, but
I mean, if we end up losing to the economic engine of China in the longer term, I don't feel like it'll be because of a QA union sprouting up. I feel like we're probably already on that course, but I do hear you.
Well, part of it historically has just been because China just is less regulations on work life. There's this whole, what was it, 669? I forgot. There's this whole policy of 969. Yeah, just working 9 hours a day, 6 days a week, or whatever sort of thing. And so the hours are super crazy there. But there's a lot of pushback there too in China of having with the youth of pushing back against that sort of culture. So I don't know. But anyway, my point is just like it's tricky. There's just a lot. It's just not as simple as doing a union now.
Of course.
Yep.
Yeah. The other news item I thought was I wanted to get your guys' take on it is the whole, I mean, the government's starting to like pop off with the gaming companies, with the FTC regulating or fining Epic Games for over like, what was it, 520 million?
Oh, yeah,
like
they had that.
$500
Yeah, I recall that now. Wasn't it regarding like data collection or they were the dark patterns. They were forced
to talk about
change.
dark patterns for years, right? Which is crazy to me. I mean, there's a lot of questions with it, which is like, okay, I think part of it was also about voice chat in the game because there's a lot of regulations, or there's a lot of part of the fine was that a lot of youth are getting bullied in the game, and a lot of the reason why they're getting bullied is through voice chat. And so, what do we have to do? Like, we have to get rid of voice chat, or you have to I don't know, right? So there's a lot of interesting downstream ramifications of that. But
yeah, if you want to have voice chat in your game, you have to routinely pay damages, lawsuits or whatever. It's pretty rough.
Yeah. It's really curious to see a lot of activity by the FTC just because the Blizzard ABK acquisition by Microsoft is everyone's just kind of on the edge of their seat waiting to see what happens.
It does feel like the FTC is kind of getting their feet wet, warming up for the larger examination of that acquisition to come.
Yeah. So I think if it goes through, and my guess is it does go through, they're going to make it a little painful. So we'll see what happens.
That is interesting. I had actually completely missed the child privacy concerns relating to voice chat and bullying, threatening, harassment. And that's like fully half of the fine. But for some reason, the dark patterns was kind of reading more. So do you think that this ends up, do you feel like you'll see other game companies beginning to like tighten up their own regulation of their like VoIP channels in anticipation of maybe like catching the same kind of fine? Like Epic was made the example basically because they can take it and they're the most prominent. Like, do you think this kind of action is going to keep coming down the pipe? It's tough to know. Like, we don't have like a huge history in the States, I feel like, of regulators wading into games like this. It feels like every report I see, it's always something in the EU regarding GDPR, you know, really putting the clamps on developers and publishers. It's interesting to see this stuff come home.
Yeah, I mean, the game industry has been hit by a lot of these things from all over the place. A big one is IDFA. Is it IDFA or whatever it's called on mobile on iOS devices, where you know all these games would a lot of their entire model, like this performance marketing model, would be you have ads in your game and you're getting data from people playing other games and you give them different ads, and it was like a whole science. But then Apple, what they did is they made it to where, you know, when you open an app, it asks you, do you want your to be tracked? And most people say, no, I don't want to be tracked. Like, who wants, like, yes, track me? You know, like not a lot of people do that. And so it's really kind of screwed their entire model. And so because of that, a lot of mobile games now companies are just kind of all of their revenues dropping because of that. And so that's like one example of in the industry of things that's been hit. And of course, like the loot box regulations, like you said, GDPR kind of stuff. And of course, in China, there's always been all these regulations, and they're basically can't even publish the game in China right now. Yeah,
Didn't they just reopen the queue recently? Like they pushed a whole batch of them through. You linked that.
I did see that. Yeah. Valorant's being published in China now, so we'll see how that goes. I don't know. It's a weird transformative time for sure.
I mean, what they like with respect to VoIP, like if it gets bad enough, even slightly bad, it seems like everyone will just turn it off. You know, like I feel like we've learned that most big companies aren't going to put in the effort and cost to police it, so they're just going to turn it off. And right, like how much does it really cost them? It's not like people are going to stop playing.
Nope. Discord exists.
You know,
it would be a shame
for the player, right?
Yeah, it'd be a shame.
There's a lot of good interactions with VoIP, but there's, you know, a small percentage of really bad ones.
Prox voice is a major value add, at least in terms of entertainment. I feel like for me, I don't like participate in it super often, but being on the receiving end of it, it always does add like a nice human layer.
Yeah. I predicted VoIP in Tarkov was going to be a massive failure, and I was very happy to be wrong for the most part.
Oh yeah, I was surprised in Tarkov.
But I think that comes down to them policing it actually. Where I want to say that they've done more to police it than I was expecting, because I was expecting all kinds of like audio warfare, you know, like people just, you know, on one side just spamming noise, right, to kill your ability to hear them, or tricks, you know, sounds of grenades or, you know, whatever it is. But it has been a pretty good value add, as you say, to the experience, you know. And I don't know what that comes down to. You could say the Tarkov community is better or more mature because of the demands of the game, but
it's an esoteric game.
Yeah. Or you could say they've done a good job policing it potentially, which I have no visibility on. They definitely give you tools to report VoIP.
I highly doubt the policing thing, because the companies that do police things like Riot, etc., still fail at it. So if they can't do it, I'm very low expectations. Battlestate has a robust system to.
Well, the one advantage, like, is because they're Russian, like. Because the fear about, you know, all like the Western games is that, you know, I do something stupid and then the company bans me and I go straight to Twitter and make up some story about how they banned me inappropriately, right? And then everyone hates on Riot because, you know, poor Kevin got his account banned, even though he was being a complete a-hole, right? But in Russia, they're just like, F yourself, right? Like they're sort of immune to that backlash, right? Like
just
Not
disappears.
completely, but you
Sure.
know what I'm saying?
Oh,
Yeah,
totally. Yeah.
like their public presence is much more immune to like that kind of nonsense, right? Because we
Mhm.
dealt with that a lot at Blizzard. It's like, oh, they banned me for this reason, something really innocuous, and then you look at their account and you're like, oh Jesus, this guy's a terrorist, like he's an absolute fiend online, right? Like so, but he can just say whatever he wants, and then it's evil Blizzard banning people for no reason, and the company can't defend itself at all, right? Like, but
No, it's an
yeah,
interesting observation.
I was surprised to see it be such a good ad, and so the idea of like all these companies just turning it off to avoid punishments down the road would be sad for all the players.
Let's move on and talk about the main topic here, which is that there was another Dark and Darker playtest. Actually, the last time we met up, which was ages ago now, we were talking about Dark and Darker as well. And I'm glad that we had that much time in between because I got to play it. I played it a bunch with Chris. There was that night we all tried to play it. You two played together.
Mm-hmm.
I have a much deeper appreciation for this game now than I did before. Even though I probably only played like 10 hours or so, I was watching the hell out of this game. Holy shit, this is such a watchable game. It was just nonstop entertainment, man.
That's an interesting statement. Now, did you watch it?
So.
Did you appreciate watching it after you played it or before you played it?
I didn't. Yeah, after I played it.
Okay.
Just enough engagement. Yeah, to understand like kind of what was at stake and the level of skill that was kind of being displayed there. But I just feel like the presentation of the game itself just lends itself really well to watching. Like there's just a lot of there's a lot of tension. The ambiance of the game is killer. It's just like it's a lot of like waiting and potentially sitting around. Like one of the Moon streams I was watching, people will go like kind of beyond the circle there and just be like basically camping and meditating in a room, constantly taking damage, chugging potions, waiting like a predator for like 45 seconds before like the one person that they saw like a glimmer of movement from decides to come back into the room. But it's just like the tension is just, I feel so intense.
Yeah.
And like
it's
really dynamic, right? And I think that's what makes it so watchable for me is it just has like a lot of really clear highs and lows. And it can like go up really quickly and then come down really quickly, which means like you're never really getting kind of comfortable with the pace of it. And it's tough for me to tune out. It feels like it's just very catchy in that way. But
like that all makes sense to me. I totally agree. But the comment I've heard is, from people, like especially people, because I've been kind of an advocate, you should try this, play this game, it's amazing, etc. And then, people look it up and they'll just be like, really? Like they'll watch a little bit of streaming, and they'll be like, oh, the game looks kind of janky and the art's not great.
Yeah.
It's, what is this, like Morrowind PvP? Like, right? Like, and so, yeah, like I think it has that sort of initial bad perception. And then once you play it and sort of get it and you feel it, then it turns on its head. And now it's like, yeah, you want to watch people playing, especially really good players that are doing well and, sort of the Twitch environment. So yeah, it's an interesting thing, but I do think that one of the things slowing it down is like that first impression.
Yeah, I wonder if I would have decided to watch as much of it if I hadn't played a little bit of it first, because like the combat and everything really does not present well. And some of the things that I was really impressed by in my watching and why I would stick to people was just, the kind of like exploiting of the combat system and the AI of the weird little dance of like moving in to start the swing and then backing out, or finding the right chests to sit on where you kind of perfectly glitch the guy. Or, lining up every single headshot on a stream of magic missiles, which is like way harder than it actually seems. Like,
right.
I understood how talented these players were because they weren't even having to think about these things anymore. Whereas the level I was playing at, every skeleton was still a legitimate threat,
Right. Absolutely.
And so it was cool to see them having to internalize that. But if I didn't understand, I'd just be like, oh, this looks easy. And also the combat just seems like really soupy and kind of slow. Yeah. Morrowind is really the best comparison there. It's not particularly satisfying, and it tends to be over so quickly too. A lot of these encounters, when they do happen and you get in striking range, are like 2-3 hit affairs. People just crumple.
Yeah, but getting the hits takes a while.
But getting the hits is really hard. Yeah. And it's like it's all
I
the
talked to Chris a little
foreplay.
bit about this.
It's all the
But
foreplay.
yeah, the
And then it's
foreplay,
over.
right.
It's over in like 2
Just
seconds.
like Tarkov, there's very little foreplay, right? Like
Really?
it's just, oh, there's a guy there, bam. Now he's shooting me, I'm shooting him. Oh my god, one of us died, right? Like,
so I think
whereas in this
really
game, it's like guy, and then figure out, well, okay, what's our strategy here, and then you try to execute the strategy.
Go ahead.
So there's
Chris.
like phases to it. Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Oh, no. I was just saying, no, I think what's interesting about the game, and Kevin and I were talking about this during the break, and basically we had our own private podcast. But we're just talking. Yeah, we're just talking about like it's interesting that the game every beta push is like more popular than the next, and why it resonates with people. And what's interesting, that's really interesting, right? And it goes, and I did this. We had, I think, one of our first podcasts. It may have been one of the first. Was we were kind of talking about some of the themes that I wrote in this blog about indie versus AAA and why so many games are the most exciting from indie, like these indie AA games at best, and why AAA kind of still really struggles to like break new ground or do anything interesting. And we were talking about Valheim at the time, and there's just keeps all these examples. I still think it's still very much the case, and it's still really interesting that you have Valheim, you have Tarkov, you have the Vampire Survivors game recently was a huge thing. Now I think some of the larger companies are trying to follow that game and build the larger ones, and then now with Dark and Darker, it's just a constant thing. And I don't know, it still remains really interesting to me, but I do think the things that Dark and Darker does well is it just has such a player experience that resonates with a lot of people, which is just you're in dungeon diving with friends that are like a certain class, and it's like D&D, like Dungeons Dragons, and all those themes just get hit on, and throughout the entire experience, whether it's like you feel like a rogue because you can pickpocket and you can interact quicker and you move faster and you use daggers, you're stealth in the shadows, whatever, it just hits all these notes in a really well, in a cool experience, even though despite all the jankiness and the art is passable. Like, performance wasn't amazing. I
have another theory related to that as well, specifically with Dark and Darker, but and I don't have a counter example, but Dark does something really smart with their playtest, which is they turn them off and they make you wait another month before you can play again, which creates that need, right? Because you never get to play as much as you want.
You can get sick of it, and get like the sugar crash afterwards. It's just
right. And so like the longer a playtest is up, the more people realize like the flaws in the game or the exploits that you were talking about, and the game becomes easier. It becomes sillier, and people start doing some creative things that are fun and interesting, but a lot of things that are just degenerate and lame, right? So the experience can get worse over time, especially if like everything isn't tightened up perfectly, right, in that particular build, which it rarely is in early access. But I feel like, and so the developers of like Dark and Darker, they realize this, and they care about the experience people are having, and so they turn it off and they make you wait until the next one, and then you're all excited and play the hell out of it, and then it turns off again and repeat, right? Whereas a AAA studio would be like, well, we're so worried about MAUs or whatever that we have to keep it up at all times, otherwise we'll disappear on the market, sort of thing. And they can't stomach that idea, so they don't turn it off, and they let it run, or they would let it run until way past the point where the game just isn't performing anymore. Everyone's figured out the AI, it's broken in this way, so it's just dumb and easy, and people are doing all kinds of like the one build that works or whatever, like all the problems are exposed, and people are just playing it to death, and they're getting sick of it, and they're getting tired of it, like you say. And then when it comes out, everyone's just like, okay, there's a few patches and we got to play it, but I'm still kind of mostly riding that sick of it feeling, rather than super excited to jump back in.
If they had extended it like one more time, I think, because it was originally supposed to end on the 23rd, and then they extended it to the 26th. If they had pushed it one more time, I think I would have stopped actively kind of seeking out these streams. I think I was just
Right.
about getting to the point where I was like, okay, I can kind of like see behind the curtain here.
Yep. I
know
could
which
feel that
classes
too.
are powerful, and like but they pulled it away
Right.
kind of just at the right time. All I wish they had done instead, and this, it's difficult to accommodate this because they would have had to have people maybe working through one of the typically like deadest weeks of the year. But I feel like if they had done it between Christmas and New Year's over here in like the sort of North American working calendar, I mean, everybody is around, and that is just like a huge gaming week for me. And I wish they had offset it just like a tiny bit,
Right.
just like selfishly.
And then like let's assume I'll call you a more mature gamer, right? Like you have the discipline to sort of walk away when things aren't as fun, or maybe you just have more options and you play other games in the meantime. But when you think about like average player who's obsessed with whatever it is they're doing, they don't have that discipline. So they just keep playing well past that red line where they're totally sick of it, but they keep playing anyway.
Mm-hmm.
And then they become really sick of it and really toxic and really like disenfranchised, and it ruins them, right? So like managing that, I think, has been really smart the way they've done it with Dark and Darker.
Yeah, these windows are working well for them, and I appreciated the candor and the responsiveness of the team because they were having all sorts of stability issues and stuff early on.
Mm-hmm.
But like it feels like they kind of get a pass. Like I wasn't even sure if the Twitter account I was reading for server updates was the official one or like some kind of third-party translation account. But it just kind of like came off so wholesome, and like the devs were really just busting so hard that like you didn't even really mind when you'd get these like half-hour breaks of, things being offline.
You've read about their like basic intro to the studio. Have you heard that?
I don't know much. Chris was kind of talking about them, like how they
claim to be. I think this is them. 90% sure this is them. I could be wrong. They claim to be a studio that used to make gacha games, and they feel that this is their penance. And so they're making a game that's like player friendly and right, like they're doing all the anti sort of consumerism stuff. And so, I thought it was really cute how they sort of announced themselves as like a bunch of devs that are tired of that machine, and they're trying to make just a fun game for gamers again. And so it makes sense that they would, have like that sort of feel about their communication to the public and how hard they work to get things working.
Yeah.
There's a podcast interview with them, or a YouTuber interviewed them in their Korean studio, kind of like a startup basically. And I think right now they have like a head count of like 30 or so, but for a while it was just like a couple of them. And they're kind of like 18 months, almost 2 years in, I think, or at least over a year. And they were like working on standard Korean games, like a lot of gacha games. And so I don't remember the part where he said it was like their penance, but they did say like they were kind of frustrated with the trends of the industry, just like fleecing players and all these things. And they just want to do something that they thought was fun or interesting. And so,
This is such a testament to the approach of just really dialing in your core loop first and foremost. And I feel like it's really paid off for them. Like you can see where all the rough edges they haven't gotten to are yet. They're not really even afraid of them. But it just doesn't matter because you can see how much time they've spent just in the game, doing the dungeon, the classes with their barest kind of outfits. I mean, it just feels like their attention has really been focused in the right place, such that like all the window dressing that's not done yet, it doesn't really even bother me. Like, when you're working on your own stuff, I feel like it's easy to get anxious about the things that you haven't done yet, even if you can reassure yourself you're working on the core loop. Playing another game that feels like it has this philosophy, which is, it's not like some unique philosophy. I feel like it's just kind of like common sense and how you should be building games. But like seeing it in action and it proving itself this way, like really also calmed a lot of my own development anxieties of just like, oh, right, if you just get the main thing right, that is what fucking matters.
Yeah.
So many of the menus and skills and perks were broken. I mean, the the amount of friction navigating your inventory UI and your stash when you get back to oh my God, it's brutal. It's like a carpal tunnel simulator. But I just didn't even really care, because
and there's also just a lot of little things in the core gameplay experience too that either they don't know what they're doing and they're guessing and have like tremendous instincts, or they're very, very smart about really specific things. Like I'll give you just a weird example: the feet slapping, the bare feet slapping on the tile floor.
I love it, dude.
Right? It's just amazing, right?
Yeah, I want to talk about the sound
and I don't know if that's
game.
accidental or if that's like super intentional, like masterful design. But again, like just little things like that make me really, really confident that when they do make that pass in terms of like touching a lot of those other things that are rough around the edges, they're going to do a good job with it. At least that's my hope. But
it is it seems like such an obvious choice because that is the sound of bare feet, smacking against a stone floor. But I can tell you that like my brain would not have gone to wanting to make the barefoot sound or the like unsold sound, a bunch of those sorts of slaps. The sound design of this game is I don't know how to describe it. There are moments that are like very, very designy, like the protection potion and a lot of the magic is like very kind of modern, sort of Transformers like synth feeling, kind of future-y sound design. And then there is a ton of which all is like very punchy and powerful and good, but I think a lot of folks would argue that it maybe doesn't sound magical, like aesthetically in terms of fitting with the very low fantasy kind of D&D-ness of everything else. So some of those seem out of place, but they are very satisfying. But like the environmental sound design, the choices for Foley and movement and the different sounds for every sort of type of weapon striking every different type of object are all like very dialed in. And I feel like those details, and again, such like sort of a low fantasy, realistic feeling game in which you can get shanked and die in 2 seconds and there's no fanfare, like really, really make a huge, like they're very, very grounding. Like the sound of accidentally stabbing a wall with your dagger versus accidentally hitting it with a barbarian, or, trying to like break open a barrel with your like crappy rogue dagger or your rapier versus a barbarian like thunking it. I mean, you really... None of the sounds that I feel like they've used for it are generic, and a lot of care has been put into matching those things up. I don't know. I feel like one of you two in an earlier podcast, I was saying to Chris, you mentioned how the way that the class fantasy is done from like top to tail in this to the extent of barbarians like opening chests by breaking them open instead of just regularly opening them. Like you wish that were done more in games that tout class fantasy. And I feel like I really appreciate that having played this now. And also I just want to point out how much a lot of that like grounded like weapons and material sound design is really like locking that in.
Yeah.
And the other... I'm sorry.
You touch on it from that sort of immersion, but go ahead. Sorry.
No, I just like my sound design gush. I just realized how much of it I was like storing up too. It's I love and I know that Tarkov also does this, like that's also a philosophy there. It's obviously incredibly, key as an element strategically for figuring out where people are. But the lack of really kind of like any ambient noise, by which I mean like just a low rumbly bed or some sort of like spooky overtone to the dungeon, like it just gets so quiet. And it really lets like all of the detail that is like, how many rooms away is this wraith that's being fought right now? And like being able to hear the clomp of like, is that one pair of boots or is that 2 pairs of boots? And are they downstairs? Did they leave the door open? Like, it's just, I guess as a sound designer, you always want all of like the environmental tricks. You want to be able to use like occlusion and obstruction, which are kind of sound treatments that like affect how a sound sounds if it's gone through a wall or if it's going around a corner. You want all these bells and whistles, but in many games you can't really justify the performance cost of using them, or you can't justify the programmer cost of building these if you don't have these things in your engine already. And so it's so satisfying to see a game that has these things and they are instrumental to the like actual game design experience. And like they're not wasted, they're not frills. It just, I don't know, just warms your heart to like see the sound design so front and center as like you could not play this game with the sound off. You would get murked in 2 rooms,
Yeah, again, I love that. The connection, and you talk about the immersion, but I'm glad you brought it around to the game design experience as well. Because that's the other part of like the feet slapping is like just the decision to have like half of the classes go in barefoot in their base kit, right? Like why? Why would you?
so
Why would
yeah,
somebody not be wearing shoes? Like at least something, right?
it's
But
so
they're like,
immersive,
no,
man. Like
we want it to sound like this. We want a new barbarian or whoever. I think he actually has boots, but we want them to sound like a noob from 2 rooms over, right?
I love that you can tell. Yeah, you can tell if someone's just like loaded down. In the same way that, they represented visually with like potions on the belt versus keeping them in the inventory. Like I really like that there are so many subtle clues to be picked out from the, the audio and just like the character outfitting and stuff to like help make your decision before that moment of engaging, because when you do engage, like we said, it's over in like 2 seconds, so you need to be able to suss out as much as you can before they start swinging at you.
So good.
I just feel like it's very, very immersive to me, because again, there are so many quiet moments. It's such a dynamic game, and it's constantly pulling back. You spend, probably like half of your playtime within the game just fucking around in your inventory, drag dropping stuff. And I always really love the moment of like you're clinking these potions together rapidly, defragmenting your inventory basically. And then you take the one item that you drop out on the ground, and suddenly like that sound has like all of the environmental reverb, and it really reminds you for a split second, like, oh, get out of your your little like UI management zone, because you're still in a fucking like stone dungeon, and you need to be paying attention to like if you hear anybody nearby. Like I feel like it's always really pulling you back into the realism of the game. Like, anyways, just really
time for Tetris, man.
Yeah, exactly, just really attentive sound design overall. I appreciate it, because I think that this game could have caught quite as well without them going as far as they did on it. And I notice a lot of the touches they've done, and I really appreciate them. It's great sound design.
Kevin, did you play? Because I didn't play the past weekends just because I was traveling every weekend. I didn't have a laptop to play it.
Yeah, I played the previous 2. And this latest one I played the least. Like I played most of my time was that night I played with you. In fact, I played probably 4 matches outside of that. So
I did hear some feedback from another designer who was playing before in the past weekends that this one he didn't like. He thought it was the worst one. And the reason why is because they tuned the creatures really, really harshly, so that soloing now feels like impossible. This is what he said.
Okay.
I played a little solo. I don't think it's the best way to play the game, at least not for me. I like, especially because I like playing the cleric. I like healers, support. So I usually like playing in squads. But I did play a little bit solo, and I do agree, like it's really rough. Like the difficulty is really, really hard. But I was curious kind of what your thoughts there were.
It felt about the same to me, honestly. Like, I sort of like Luca mentioned earlier, I sort of figured out the dance between me and the various types of enemies in previous runs. And so it's funny that he said that it's harder, because I almost felt like it's kind of easier, but I put that down to my experience rather than any tuning they might have done. That's a really, really hard thing to get right between solo play and group play. Really, really hard. I would almost say impossible to get right if you want everyone to sort of have the same experience. I think this game is going to land somewhere probably closer to group friendly than solo friendly, right? And I think that's better for the game.
Yeah.
But it sucks in terms of like accessibility, and I just want to play by myself and that kind of thing. But I think ultimately, it's better for the game that groups win, because it's a way better experience.
Yeah, and it's pretty much kind of like a AAA, I mean, mostly AAA, but general kind of idea in games these days, especially if it's going to be kind of a live game, like a PvP game, is you got to have solo queue, like you have to have like, it has to be soloable, because that's how most people play games. And, they like the idea of playing with other people, but they don't want to like, there's a lot of people who also just want to play solo, and just like, PUBG, Apex, all these games have a solo, singles kind of queue or whatever. And it's kind of designed around allowing that. But it does feel like Dark and Darker is nudging you to play in a squad of 3, especially because they have the Trinity, and then they also have like, even in the tavern, like when the first screen when you go into the game, it has a table with 3 chairs. So it's really kind of nudging you. Yeah, play with 3 people. But yeah, I did check out the Reddit, and I was talking with some people on the community playing it and getting, kind of getting the sense. I get the sense a lot of people want the game to have more support for solo. But I do agree with you that I think if their vision for it is that it's a squad kind of experience, and that's the best experience, then they should choose that and stick with that.
All right, double down on that. Yeah, so the solo experience then becomes, I am so exceptionally skilled at this game that I can do it solo, right? Like, which is also a really cool thing. It's like hard mode.
Oh yeah, I was loving watching the solo players. I mean, it's just an opportunity for people to play make and farm clips if you're really good, right? And you could even see with this playtest there were the couple of classes that were just meant for showboating.
Right.
The wizard with like 800 APM spell switching and viz haste, like so cool to watch.
And then it becomes sort of like the designer's responsibility, sort of, I think that's the right word, but it becomes a responsibility to resist people that expect to be that solo god, but are never really going to get there, and those people are going to beg the designers to make the game easier so that they can get there, but it's artificial. You know what I mean? Like, let that be, a hard mode, and let that be something that's, only for people that are exceptionally skilled. And if you just dream about it, but you're not good enough, then you're not going to get there. So go play with friends, go find friends.
So we're getting kind of towards the end of the podcast. I'm curious, like, if you were talking to the devs on this game, what are some things that you think they should focus on or add or do or change at all to the game?
Gosh, I feel like I'm in a position of trust right now where it's like, I want them to continue forward with what they intend, and I want them to use these playtests to prove things that they believe in, not like scan the player base for ideas. Or I don't want them to like start focusing on a solo queue because everyone has been asking that, you know what I mean? Like, I want them to like just keep at it, right? Keep improving on their original vision and be confident in it and see where it takes them. Because I've been impressed so far, and I want to see the result of them staying on that path. So, that's the avoiding it question answer. The things that I think really need work are the UI. Lucas complained about, rightly so. Tarkov is one of the worst games to steal UI from, and they basically just copy pasted it. So
it's miserable, dude. Yeah.
Both of those games need serious UI help. In terms of just flow, and it's so funny too because a lot of Tarkov players also play Dark and Darker, and one of the things Dark and Darker has, even with all of the cut and paste UI, is how fast it takes to get back into the dungeon. Like, Tarkov is so much longer to just run it back, right?
And why do you think that is, by the way? Like, why is Tarkov queue so long? Because I mean, a lot of people are playing the game.
Yeah, so I have no idea, honestly. Like, it is really weird that it almost feels like it's being throttled. Like, they don't have enough servers to run enough instances of the game.
That's my thought. Yeah.
Right. Like, but or something, or they do have enough servers, but something really bad happens because those things of scale, right? Like, it's one thing to run a game for 10,000 people. It's another thing to run it for 10 million, right? Like, you get all new sets of problems. So maybe it's one of those things and they haven't found solutions for those things. But yeah, it is really, really strange that it takes so long to get into a game of Tarkov when there's tons of people in the queue.
Yeah, because usually that's caused by one of few things. One is, you just have limited servers that can spin up for that. I mean, that was WoW Classic's problem, or WoW Vanilla in the beginning. It's just there's just not enough data centers to support the player base. So that's usually one reason. The other reason is usually you have really specific matchmaking MMR kind of thing. And so if you're queuing and you're really, really high MMR, it's going to take a long time to find a match because there's the pool of players is really small, which I don't think is Tarkov's problem. And then the third usually is probably just bad kind of code or matchmaking code.
That could be. Like that. Although you have to cut Tarkov some slack, because if you think about the amount of stuff going on in a server, in a game, in one game, like, it's crazy that a lot of games just don't have. Like most games don't have AI, and those AI all need pathing and all need AI routines. And those guys are equipping stuff and picking stuff up, and like they're really interacting with the world automatically, constantly. On top of because one of the early problems with Vanilla WoW, if you remember, was the database checks. Like it took forever to loot things. And so, we used to do those Terran Mill to South Shore PvP waves back and forth, but nobody looted anything because it would lock you in that loop, right? Waiting to see what was on the corpse forever because of the database check, right? If you also just think about the database queries on all the loot everywhere in the game, all that stuff going on. So there's a tremendous amount of stuff that's going on in Tarkov that isn't necessarily going on in such a big way in a lot of other games that are comparable. And again, I'm not a programmer, so I don't know the details of the cost of all these things, but I just remember, Joe Rumsey complaining about how expensive pathing maps were, right? For AI, and it's just okay, to have BRD constantly be trying to figure out where, to send monsters and how to get them from point A to point B was really expensive. And I don't know if the same is true today, but there's a lot of things running around and behaving and interacting and doing things, on a typical Tarkov. And then you got to add the players to top of it. So
right. No, yeah, that's a good point. How about you, Luca? What things would you suggest?
What things would I suggest to them?
Add or change? Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, Kevin's answer was just so good. I don't know what I could add. I don't know. I'll try to keep it in my discipline, I suppose, for now. I do wonder if some of the sound design, especially the magical stuff, could be a little less kind of future weapon sounding. There's some of it is just a little too it's not as grounded in the world as it could be versus kind of everything else. When you get so used to, I think, just a lot of low fantasy stuff reverberating off walls, I understand the tension between wanting to make stuff that's just kind of again, informative and realistic versus stuff that is really hot and kind of dry, that is no reverb and feels powerful and present. Cause the stuff you're firing off, you want it to sound satisfying to you, every sound in fucking Heroes of the Storm had a kick drum in it, basically. It's just very punchy. It's supposed to be very... but I do feel I don't know, some of those choices aren't the choices I would make, is I guess what I would say about that. But overall, it's just done so fucking competently that there's not a lot to say there. And I said my UI gripes. I do understand that UI management within the game itself is a design element because of the risk involved and the time everything takes. But outside in the menus, I just feel I would just want to easily be kind of auto hoovering gold into my stash, being able to just kind of sell all if I wanted to. I don't really want to be fucking around with all that management outside there. I don't find that particularly enjoyable.
Yeah,
especially
when you're the one guy who didn't make it. Your buddies are all sorting their gear for 10 minutes, and you're let's take it. I'm ready to go. Let's go.
I know. Yeah, there's I don't think that is charming jank. You know what I mean? I think that just feels like regular jank. Anyways, the worst of it is exemplified by collecting those silver pieces that sell for 3 to 1 gold piece. Holy shit. Just selling stacks of 3 of those for 1 gold piece and then having to send it's just, no one wants to be doing that. And it does seem like there's probably some cleaning up they could do around buying and selling in the trade channels as well. I know that they have said that they don't want to create a kind of more advanced interface. Maybe they like that it's kind of a shouty, trade chat bazaar as opposed to more of an interface. But it does seem like kind of a nightmare to really navigate. And I don't know. I didn't spend much time in those. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I don't have a lot of suggestions for them gameplay wise. I guess I'll be curious to see down the line if this is the only level that they showed. Chris, you said in the previous playtest, or you had heard that they had a first level that was more of a forest or something. I do wonder if you kind of get tired of the same layout and the same mobs and, okay, here are the 6 bats in here and they aggro this way and they all drop jewelry, so we got to kill them and stand on this pillar. And I do wonder where the replay value versus the AI needs to come in,
Yeah. So that sparks, some things that I've been thinking about is It's unclear to me yet because I just haven't put that much time into the game yet. And we played the second level, or we went through the red portal once or twice, and it's probably like just too hard for us or something. And I watched some streamers play it and stuff, so it's it's designed out and stuff like that.
Yeah, we got smoked.
Yeah. And so it's unclear to me yet of like, because I think a lot of players, it just depends on what their goals are with like the player base, but I think the vast majority of players will get stuck in this first level for a long time and may perpetually get stuck there. Depending on like how the progression works, and maybe the meta game, if you just keep dying and dying and dying, eventually maybe you'll be nudged to, it's like, okay, basically every player, no matter how bad you are, you're eventually going to the second level. Like they may tune it that way. It's unclear to me yet. But I do think there's a risk of the game of just like you just get perpetually stuck in this first level, and that's going to be a weird experience. So I don't know how that's going to work. But I do agree, and the danger of that, of course, is not even just they can't ever get good to get out of this level. It's more of just they'll just get stuck in this samey room, and it gets very metronomy of like, oh, like you said, like you kill these 3 bats, you loot this, you stand on that pillar. And I was already starting to feel that through the hours we were playing. It's like it became very rote. I mean, what really kind of shakes it up is like the other players, because it's always unpredictable what's going to happen there. And so they have that as like something to lean on. So that is like an open question. I'm not too sure. It's like hard for me to like judge or to give a verdict there yet. The other things I would try to improve is kind of the class kits or lack thereof, maybe. I do think that they do a good job of realizing the fantasy of each class better than most other games. Like you were saying, Luca, about different interaction speeds or different sounds or ways you interact with stuff or whatever. Like that's really good. But I think in terms of the ability kits, like all the abilities kind of feel very in a vacuum almost. Whereas, a modern kit, like say in League or Dota or Overwatch or WoW, the abilities interact with each other, and one does this with another. Like there's almost none of that in the game, which
there's also no like element of hidden information. Like this warrior coming at me, I know exactly. When was the last time you saw a ranger without triple shot, right? Like they all sort of pack the same kit. So it'd be nice to have some hidden information, like what warrior is this guy?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I imagine they'll breathe out more of that stuff over time.
And they have that whole page of like talents or whatever that they haven't gotten to yet. So
so it may happen there.
Yeah, I fully agree with your assessment, though, that that needs work for sure.
Even if they're going to have these talents eventually, I do think out the gate there needs to be a tease of that. Like there has to be some embedded in the baseline kit. But anyways, so that's the other thing I would say. And then the other is like you said, Luca, I think stuff that they're already slated on doing. I would like to see another healer, like a priest or a bard, which I've heard they're adding. And then the other thing is like I would want to see how they tackle an open world area instead of the challenge with making this kind of game like a sword and magic Tarkov is just you're in an open area, and then you're going to be chasing people around. But the way they address this in this game is like you're a tight it's like Doom levels. It's like really like tight corridors. And so that does help alleviate that and address that challenge. But I want to see how they tackle it in an open area, which they are going to do. I've heard the first level is supposed to be the woods, and we're actually playing in these betas or in these playtest weekends in the second level. So it'll be interesting to see how the woods feel. It's probably going to be really chill, like just gather some stuff and move to the real level. But I'm curious to see how the game will work there.
Maybe it'll be like Meridian 59 Woods, where it's like actual walls with just textured trees on the walls,
That could be that could be good.
Meridian 59 Woods.
That's a reference. I don't know what that is.
Yeah. It's throwback. I'd be curious. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how much the open world versus the dungeon level affects class balance too. Like, I just feel like Wizards were dominating so hard because of these choke point 1v3s, just catching people in these huge fireball blasts, but with more room to maneuver. I wonder if that changes things up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, Meridian 59 doesn't look too different from Dark and Dark.
Yeah. It's interesting. So I don't know, just a random note. I wanted to recommend this game to a bunch of my buddies around the holiday season because I was like, let's play. And it appealed to a couple of them visually. And then they found out that it was competitive PvP and they were bummed out, which just says to me that like there are people out there that kind of want more first person dungeon crawly RPG style combat, you know? And they were like, oh, you know, those types of games are toxic. This is one friend of mine that said that. And I haven't seen that in the playtest so far, but playtest environments and like the first month of a game are always uniquely wholesome. Like the metas aren't really there yet. And so you can't judge that. But with no VoIP in this one so far, it did really feel like, well, I mean, some people are teabagging, but like the toxicity was a bit clamped, you know? Like I don't know how bad it would really get. I wonder how that's going to change over time. I wonder what toxic in Tarkov looks like. It's like chain closing doors on somebody, like I don't know.
All the toxicity is between teammates, honestly.
No, for sure. Yep, absolutely. And in this game, of course, same as Tarkov, it has friendly fire. And so that's why I'm also
holy shit, we didn't even talk about friendly fire. Oh my gosh, what a design choice. Brutal, man. The amount of arrows I accidentally would put in yours or Court's head, like it's just you can't fucking avoid.
Yeah. Once the axe starts swinging, you have to like manage where it ends up. I love that too. I'm linking a game for you and your friends in the live chat.
Oh, great! Dungeons they'll check it out. Hey, gosh, since we probably won't talk about this again until the next playtest, one other thing that about the janky combat that actually felt like a weirdly good kind of frictive point for me was when the barbarian swings like a two-handed axe, you can kind of guide the axe head down in a way that you hit two different things on the way down, and it goes kind of like chunk. And it felt like, you know, one of those learned moves like the dance or manipulating the rest of the combat system. And I thought it was kind of cool. I sort of really enjoyed having to aim your melee strikes or the tech of knowing that like your third rate, you know, dagger hit that comes out from the offhand comes in at a certain angle.
Yeah.
I don't know. I haven't really played a lot of sort of like realistic melee simulating games. I'm sure there are a bunch of medievals and, you know, Mountain Blade and things like that Mordhau maybe that do this. But for me, it was new to have to really try to like aim with a strike above the shield. And it
also
really,
the shield play works that way too. Like
how you
the
shield play.
Things.
I mean, Chris, you seemed frustrated with some of the shield deflection. Like it wasn't really doing it the way you wanted, you know?
Yeah, I got better at it towards.
You got good.
It's very hard to know how to be successful with a shield.
Yeah. Which is cool
because it obscures so much of your vision. That's the main thing. It's like, okay, I want to block. I know which way it's coming in, but I can't see very well past the shield.
I would say my preference is always not FPS combat, or at least in melee. But I think it works for this game. So
gosh, and like this is there's probably not a lot that needs to be said about this. Just the lighting. I just love the commitment to things actually being dark and darker. Like this game gets pitch ass black, and I really love how hopeless you can feel without a torch in an area, or just like what a strategic element having a torch, not using a torch, turning off the lights, chucking your torch. Like I really enjoy that play overall.
Finding a chest in a dark corner because you popped a torch, you know.
Yeah.
That you wouldn't have otherwise seen. Like
turn your torch on because you're just a greedy little scav, like fishing bracelets off the ground, and then somebody puts an arrow in you from behind. Yeah, that's what you get, man. Okay, well, let's close this one up. Thanks everyone for coming out. Hopefully, we're a little more consistent in the new year. You know how it goes. Leave some questions and topics in the Discord as always, and we'll try to be with you soon. Chris, why don't you take us out in 2023?
All right, guys. Later, gamers.